My name is Charmaine. I am 35 years old and somehow still healing from wounds my family inflicted. As a successful software developer, I escaped their toxicity but maintained occasional contact. Last Sunday, they invited me to an upscale brunch to catch up. Between mimosas and avocado toast, my mother leaned forward smirking. "You know, Charmaine, you are lucky we even include you. Pity goes a long way." I simply sipped my coffee and smiled. That night, I logged in, disabled every family credit account, and emailed my lawyer about selling the cabin. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. Growing up in Fairfield, Connecticut meant privilege to outsiders. But inside our sprawling colonial home, emotional coldness permeated every corner. Our four-bedroom house with its manicured lawn and heated swimming pool was a fortress of expectations I could never quite meet. My childhood bedroom painted pale blue. At my mother Elaine's insistence, despite my preference for green, became my sanctuary in prison. From elementary school through high school, I maintained straight A's, joined honor societies, and dedicated every waking moment to perfecting my coding skills. I built the foundation for my own technology company right in that bedroom, desperately hoping my relentless work ethic would finally earn their respect. It never did. 4 years ago, I walked away from my family with only $150 to my name and a single heavy backpack. They had systematically cornered me into draining my entire $25,000 life savings to cover the deposit on a brand new Porsche for my sister Chloe and her flashy husband Terrence. When I finally found the courage to say no to giving them more money, my mother Elaine packed my bags herself and told me to get out of her house. She told our entire community and our church congregation that I was a selfish, ungrateful daughter who abandoned her family in their time of need. I spent years rebuilding my life from absolute nothing. I coded day and night. I launched a cybersecurity and crisis management firm that eventually secured massive corporate contracts. I stayed quiet. I stayed out of their way. But yesterday, that peaceful silence was permanently shattered. My sister Chloe finally decided to search my name online. She did not find the struggling freelance programmer she assumed I was. Instead, she found a major Forbes article listing me as one of the top female chief executive officers in the country, detailing my company's recent $90 million valuation. The reaction was immediate, explosive, and terrifyingly predictable. Chloe called my mother, crying uncontrollably. Then she called my father. Then my brother. Within just 36 hours, I had 70 missed calls lighting up my personal phone. I was sitting in my corner office looking out through the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city skyline when I finally decided to listen to the voicemails. I pressed play on the very first message. My mother Elaine's voice filled the quiet room. Her tone wildly shifted between fake, desperate sobbing and vicious, entitled demands. "Charmaine, how dare you hide your massive success from us?" She screamed into the phone, her voice echoing with rage. "Your sister is stressed out of her mind. Terrence is losing his real estate firm, and you are sitting on millions of dollars. You owe this family. Pick up the phone right now before I come down there and make you listen to me." I deleted the message without a second thought. I had barely taken a sip of my morning coffee when the intercom on my heavy oak desk buzzed loudly. It was Sarah, my front desk receptionist. Her voice was trembling with anxiety. She told me there were two women in the lobby causing a massive scene, screaming at the security guards and demanding to see the owner of the company. I knew exactly who it was. I did not panic. I did not hide in my executive suite. I calmly stood up, smoothed out my tailored suit, and walked directly to the private elevator. As the doors opened to the ground floor, the chaotic sound of my mother's voice echoed off the pristine marble walls of the lobby. She was pointing her finger aggressively at my head of security, quoting Bible verses about honoring thy mother and father. Chloe stood right next to her, wearing a designer dress that I knew for a fact was purchased on one of the family credit cards I had just disabled the night before. The moment they saw me stepping out of the elevator, their fake outrage magically transformed into fake warmth. Chloe rushed forward with her arms wide open, putting on a grand theatrical show for the receptionist, the security team, and the several high-profile clients waiting in the lounge area. Oh my goodness, look at you. Chloe cheered loudly, making sure every single person in the room heard her voice. My little sister, the big executive. We are so proud of you, Charmaine. We are family, and family always finds their way back to each other. Your company is so incredibly beautiful. I know you built all of this with the strong values our parents instilled in us. She reached out to hug me, but I took a firm step back, leaving her arms awkwardly suspended in the empty air. The temperature in the room seemed to instantly drop. The fake smile on Chloe's face twitched violently. My mother Elaine stepped forward, crossing her arms tightly across her chest, her eyes narrowing with familiar disdain. Do not embarrass us in front of your employees, Charmaine. Elaine hissed quietly, though her sharp voice still carried across the silent lobby. We are blood. We are your family. You have money now, and Terrence needs capital to save his business immediately. You are going to write us a check today, or we are going to tell every single news outlet in this city about how you selfishly abandoned your sick mother and your pregnant sister. I looked at them. I really looked at them. For 35 years, these two women had made me feel incredibly small, unworthy, and invisible. But standing there in the lobby of a building that I practically owned, they just looked pathetic. I did not raise my voice. I did not lose my temper. I simply used the cold, hard truth as my weapon. Blood! I asked, my voice calm, steady, and loud enough for every single person in the lobby to hear perfectly. Is that what you're calling it now? Is that what you called it 4 years ago when you both cornered me in the kitchen and forced me to empty my $25,000 savings account? You took every penny I had to pay for Terrence's luxury car deposit, and when I asked for a repayment plan, you kicked me out into the winter rain with $150 in a backpack. Chloe's face turned completely pale. She looked around nervously as my employees and clients began whispering among themselves. Elaine's jaw dropped, her respectable church lady facade crumbling instantly. Charmaine, keep your voice down right now, Elaine demanded, her face turning bright red with humiliation. That is private family business. No, I replied coldly, staring directly into my mother's eyes. That is financial abuse and theft. And now that I am a millionaire, suddenly you want to play the loving family card. You do not get to claim my success when you actively tried to destroy my future. Furthermore, since you brought up money, you should probably know that I logged into the joint family accounts last night. I disabled all the credit cards I have been quietly paying off for the last 5 years. I also emailed my lawyer to finalize the sale of the lake cabin, which is legally in my name. You have zero access to my finances anymore. Chloe completely lost her mind. She lunged forward, pointing a manicured finger directly at my face. You cannot do that, she screamed, dropping all pretense of being the supportive, loving sister. Terrence is going bankrupt. If you sell that cabin, we have absolutely nothing to borrow against. You are a selfish, evil person. We are your family. You owe us everything. I owe you exactly what you gave me when I had nothing. I stepped closer to her, making her back away in shock. Absolutely nothing. I turned to my head of security. Marcus, please escort these two individuals off the property immediately. If they refuse to leave, quietly call the police and press charges for trespassing. My mother began wailing a loud, theatrical cry designed to garner sympathy, but nobody in the lobby was buying it. As Marcus and two other guards firmly guided them toward the revolving glass doors, Elaine shouted vicious curses at me, promising that God would punish me for my arrogance. Chloe was practically dragging her heels, screaming that she would sue me for everything I owned. I stood completely still, watching them get pushed out onto the busy city sidewalk. The heavy glass doors finally shut, cutting off the sound of their screaming. The lobby was entirely silent for a moment, before the normal hum of business slowly resumed. I let out a long, steady breath, feeling an incredible weight lift off my shoulders. I had finally done it. I had stood up to them and severed the toxic tie. But just as I turned around to walk back to the elevator, my personal cell phone began to vibrate heavily in my jacket pocket. It was not a number I had saved, but I recognized the area code. I answered the call, pressing the phone to my ear. Charmaine, please do not hang up. The voice on the other end was trembling, breathless, and desperate. It was Terence, my brother-in-law. He was whispering frantically, and I could hear the terrifying sound of papers being thrown around and heavy boots stomping in the background. "What do you want, Terence?" I asked sharply. "Your wife and mother were just dragged out of my building." "Charmaine, I do not care about the cabin or the credit cards right now," he pleaded, his voice cracking with genuine terror. "You run a cybersecurity firm. You know how to wipe servers. You know how to manage a massive digital crisis. Please, you have to help me right now. The FBI just kicked down the doors to my office. They are raiding my real estate firm. If you do not help me hide these digital files, I am going to federal prison." I let the heavy silence hang on the line for a full 10 seconds. I could hear Terence breathing frantically, the sound of tearing paper and slamming desk drawers echoing loudly in the background. My brother-in-law, the man who had always paraded his tailored suits and expensive luxury watches at every family gathering, was unraveling completely. "I am not a miracle worker, Terence," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "I am a cybersecurity and crisis management executive. If federal agents are currently raiding your commercial real estate firm, you are already too late for a simple digital wipe. They already have the physical hard drives." He let out a pathetic, trembling sob that made my stomach turn. "Charmaine, please, you have government contracts. You know powerful people. You know how to spin the media narrative. Chloe is pregnant. If I go to prison, she will lose everything. She will lose the house, the cars, the entire lifestyle. You cannot let your own sister become a single mother." The sheer audacity of him using Chloe's affluent lifestyle as a bargaining chip almost made me laugh out loud. 4 years ago, they did not care if I ended up starving on the freezing streets of Connecticut. Now I was their only lifeline to survival. "I will look at your files," I finally replied, keeping my tone strictly professional. "But I am doing it on my own terms. I want a full family meeting. This Sunday. At your house for Sunday dinner. Mom, Dad, Chloe, Jamal, and you. Every single one of you needs to be sitting at that dining room table. If anyone is missing, I walk away right now and you can deal with the federal prosecutors by yourself." He agreed instantly, profusely thanking me and promising that everyone would be on their absolute best behavior. I hung up the phone and immediately called my lead forensic accountant and my top legal counsel. Within an hour, my executive conference room was transformed into a high-stakes war room. My team and I sat around the massive glass table, projecting Terence's publicly available company data and the encrypted financial files he had hastily forwarded to my secure server onto the wall monitors. What we found was not just a simple tax error or a minor real estate regulatory violation. It was a massive, meticulously planned Ponzi scheme. My lead forensic investigator, David, pointed his laser pointer to a series of offshore banking routing numbers. "Terence has been specifically targeting elderly investors in the local community," David explained. "He promises them high-yield returns on commercial developments that do not actually exist. Instead of investing their hard-earned retirement savings, he is funneling the money through shell companies in the Cayman Islands to fund his own lavish lifestyle. He is paying the old investors with money from the new investors. It is textbook wire fraud." I stared at the glowing screen, a cold realization washing over me. Terence was not just stealing from wealthy corporate developers who could afford the loss. He was stealing from the working-class people in our own community. He was stealing from the very church congregation my mother Elaine constantly bragged about leading. "What is his legal exposure level?" I asked my legal counsel, a sharp, unyielding attorney named Victoria. Victoria adjusted her glasses and looked at the data. "If the Federal Bureau of Investigation is already raiding his office, they have the paper trail. He is looking at 20 years in federal prison minimum. The only reason he is not in handcuffs right now is because they are likely building a sweeping federal indictment to catch his accomplices." I nodded slowly, formulating my strategy. I did not intend to save Terence. I intended to gather every ounce of evidence necessary to protect myself and my own company from any collateral damage. More importantly, I was going to secure the ultimate leverage against the family that had tried to destroy me. I instructed my elite team to compile a comprehensive digital dossier of Terrence's fraudulent transactions. I wanted printed copies, digital backups, and legal affidavits ready to be deployed at a moment's notice. I was walking into the lion's den on Sunday, but I was bringing invisible heavy artillery. Sunday afternoon arrived with suffocating humidity. I pulled my black armored sport utility vehicle up to the towering wrought iron gates of Chloe and Terrence's sprawling suburban McMansion. The house was a ridiculous monument to their fake wealth. It featured massive colonial columns, perfectly manicured hedges, and a small fleet of luxury vehicles parked awkwardly in the circular driveway. I walked up the marble front steps tightly holding a sleek leather briefcase containing the damning documents my team had prepared. Before I could even knock, the heavy mahogany front door swung open. My entire family was standing in the grand foyer wearing wide plastic smiles. The intense hostility from the lobby incident just 2 days prior had miraculously vanished, replaced by an unsettling forced warmth. Charmaine, my beautiful sister Chloe, squealed, rushing forward to hug me. She was wearing a loose, expensive silk dress, gently resting her manicured hand on her slightly protruding stomach to emphasize her pregnancy. Come in right now. We made all your absolute favorite dishes. My father, who had stood by silently while I was thrown out 4 years ago, offered a stiff nod and a hearty pat on the back. My mother, Elaine, actually leaned in and kissed my cheek, acting as if she had not just cursed my name in front of a dozen security guards. The sheer hypocrisy of the greeting made my skin crawl, but I maintained a perfectly neutral expression. We moved into the extravagant formal dining room. The long table was covered in expensive crystal glasses and fine china plates. The smell of roasted chicken and seasoned greens filled the air, a desperate attempt to recreate the comforting Sunday dinners of a happy family that we never actually were. My older brother Jamal was already seated at the table, pouring himself a generous glass of expensive bourbon. Jamal had never held a steady job in his adult life, preferring to float from one failed business venture to the next, while quietly draining my parents' retirement accounts. Charmaine, it is so good to see you, Jamal said, flashing his signature charismatic grin that usually got him out of trouble. I saw the big Forbes magazine article. A $90 million valuation. That is incredible. Listen, I have been thinking a lot about your success. Since you are expanding so quickly, you are going to need someone you can completely trust to handle the internal operations. I am ready to step up. Make me vice president of the company, and I will take a lot of the heavy pressure off your shoulders. The entire dining room went dead silent. I looked at Jamal, taking in his flashy designer suit and his incredibly arrogant posture. I let out a loud, genuine laugh right in his face. You want to be vice president of a major cybersecurity firm? I asked, still chuckling as I took my seat at the table. Jamal, you cannot even manage a personal checking account without overdrawing it. The only thing you would take off my shoulders is my profit margin. Absolutely not. Jamal's face flushed bright red with immediate anger, his charismatic smile dropping instantly. But before he could launch into a defensive argument, Terrence cleared his throat nervously from the head of the long table. Let us focus on why we are all here today, Terrence said. He was sweating profusely despite the heavy air conditioning blowing through the room. He looked pale, terrified, and completely exhausted. My mother, Elaine, immediately took charge of the conversation, folding her hands tightly together on top of the lace tablecloth. She put on her most pious, righteous expression, the exact same face she wore every Sunday in the front pew of our church. Charmaine, she began softly, her voice dripping with fake sincerity. Family goes through difficult times. We have had our painful misunderstandings in the past, but God works in mysterious ways. He blessed you with this massive public relations and crisis management agency for a very specific reason. He put you in this incredible position of power so you could step in and save your brother-in-law. You have the infinite resources and the high-level media connections to fix this little misunderstanding with Terrence's business. I did not blink. I slowly reached down and unclasped the metal latches of my leather briefcase. The sharp, metallic click echoed loudly in the painfully quiet dining room. I pulled out a thick-bound stack of financial dossiers and placed them squarely on the table right next to my crystal water glass. I looked directly into my mother's eyes, refusing to let her look away. God did not build my agency, Elaine, I said, my voice completely devoid of warmth. I did. I built it from the ground up with the $150 you left me with. And I do not fix little misunderstandings. I manage catastrophic criminal liabilities. Now let us see exactly what Terrence is hiding from the federal government. Terrence visibly swallowed hard. He reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a thick manila envelope, sliding it slowly across the polished mahogany dining table. His hands were shaking so severely that the envelope practically skidded into my crystal water glass. I did not immediately reach for it. I simply stared at him, letting the heavy, suffocating silence stretch out until he was forced to speak first. Go ahead and open it, Charmaine, Terrence muttered, wiping a large bead of sweat from his forehead with a monogrammed silk handkerchief. It is a standard non-disclosure agreement and a comprehensive public relations retainer contract. I had my defense lawyers drafted up early this morning. All you have to do is sign on the dotted line, and we can get started on saving my company from this massive misunderstanding. I slowly opened the envelope and pulled out the thick stack of legal papers. The document was heavily redacted. Entire paragraphs were aggressively blacked out with thick, permanent marker, leaving only vague legal jargon about media strategy, reputation repair, and crisis mitigation. I flipped to the second page, then the third, my eyes quickly scanning the carefully constructed lies. Terrence cleared his throat again, leaning forward over his untouched plate of roasted chicken, as if trying to physically push his fabricated narrative onto me. Here is the situation, Charmaine. He began, his voice desperately trying to regain a fraction of its usual arrogant confidence. My business partner, Marcus, has been completely mishandling our primary investment portfolios. He went totally rogue. He started moving large amounts of capital into unauthorized offshore accounts without my knowledge or consent. The federal authorities are confused. They are looking at the company as a whole, but it was all Marcus doing the dirty work. I just need your firm to issue a series of aggressive press releases highlighting his unauthorized activities. We need to steer the media narrative, paint me as the unsuspecting victim of a rogue partner, and feed the financial press these internal memos that definitively prove my complete innocence. He slid 3 more sheets of paper across the table. They were supposedly internal corporate memos, conveniently backdated and signed by this partner, Marcus. I glanced at them for less than 5 seconds. They were incredibly clumsy forgeries. The font kerning on the corporate letterhead did not even match Terrence's official stationery. And what exactly is my incentive for putting my $90 million company's flawless reputation on the line to peddle these obvious forgeries to the national press? I asked, dropping the fake papers back onto the table with a dismissive flick of my wrist. My mother. Elaine gasped loudly, slamming her hand flat against the table. Incentive! She shrieked, her eyes wide with manufactured theatrical outrage. You are talking about financial incentives when your own sister is sitting right across from you, carrying your future niece or nephew. Your incentive, Charmaine, is family loyalty. It is the basic human decency that your father and I tried so desperately to instill in you since you were a little girl. You should be down on your knees thanking God that you are even in a position to help us after the disgraceful way you behaved 4 years ago. I turned my cold gaze directly to my mother. The way I behaved 4 years ago, I asked smoothly. You mean when I refused to be driven into total bankruptcy just to fund a luxury sports car for Terrence? Elaine waved her manicured hand dismissively, scoffing loudly. You always dramatize everything, Charmaine. We simply asked for a temporary loan and you threw a massive childish tantrum and ran away. We were terrified for you. We prayed for you every single Sunday at church. Now you come back into our home sitting there acting high and mighty, demanding incentives to save your own flesh and blood from absolute ruin. It is frankly disgusting. Jamal leaned back in his dining chair, casually swirling the expensive amber bourbon in his glass. Listen to Mom, Charmaine, he chimed in, his voice dripping with unbearable condescension. You got lucky in the tech world. Good for you. But do not forget where you came from. Terrence is a highly respected businessman. He provides for this family. You throw out a couple of press releases, call in some favors with your journalist friends, and make this Marcus guy take the fall. It is basically a few hours of typing for you. Stop being so incredibly selfish and just do your job. I ignored Jamal completely and kept my eyes locked on Terrence's sweating face. Terrence, you still have not answered my initial question. What are you offering me to commit corporate fraud on your behalf? Terrence shifted uncomfortably in his expensive leather chair. I know your firm does not work for free, he said, his voice dropping an octave as he desperately tried to sound like a commanding executive again. I am prepared to offer you a flat cash fee of $1 million. It will be wired directly into your company's primary operating account. All you have to do is sign the contract today. Launch the media campaign by tomorrow morning, and keep the federal investigators distracted long enough for my legal team to finalize the scapegoat narrative against Marcus. $1 million, I repeated slowly, letting the massive number hang heavily in the quiet room. That is a very generous offer, Terrence. There is just one minor logistical issue with your grand plan. How exactly do you plan to wire me $1 million when the federal authorities have already frozen every single one of your domestic and international bank accounts? Terrence's jaw practically hit the floor. The remaining color drained completely from his face, leaving him looking sickly and pale. How do you know about the asset freezes? He stammered, looking frantically between me and Chloe. That is sealed federal information. The raid only happened 48 hours ago. They have not released that to the public yet. I smiled, but there was zero warmth or amusement in my expression. I am a cybersecurity expert who routinely handles high-stakes crisis management for Fortune 500 companies. Did you honestly think I would walk into this dining room without having my team run a comprehensive forensic background check on your entire financial history? Chloe burst into tears, real heavy tears this time, completely ruining her carefully applied makeup. Charmaine, please, she sobbed, reaching across the table to grab my hand. I pulled my hand away immediately, refusing to let her touch me. We are going to lose the house. We are going to lose the cars. The country club already called and suspended our membership this morning. I am pregnant. I cannot raise my baby in some tiny cramped apartment in a bad neighborhood. Terrence made a mistake, okay? But he is a good man. He is a good provider. You have so much money now. $1 million is absolutely nothing to you, but saving us is everything. You have to sign the papers. You just have to. We are your family. You are supposed to protect us. Elaine nodded vigorously, tears welling up in her own eyes to perfectly match Chloe's desperate performance. See, look what you are doing to your pregnant sister. You are causing her severe emotional distress. If anything happens to that baby, it will be entirely your fault, Charmaine. You have the power to fix this right now. Sign the contract, issue the press release. Save this family from total destruction. We will forgive you for abandoning us 4 years ago. We will welcome you back with open arms. You will finally be part of this family again. Just do the right thing for once in your life. I looked at the forged documents, then at Terrence's terrified face, then at my mother's fake tears, and finally at Chloe's desperate pleading. I reached into my sleek leather briefcase and pulled out the thick stack of dossiers my investigative team had prepared. I dropped them onto the table with a heavy thud that violently rattled the fine crystal glasses. You are right about one thing, Terrence, I said, my voice cutting through the thick tension in the room like a surgical scalpel. Marcus did not steal the money. You did. But you did not just steal from faceless corporate hedge funds or wealthy venture capitalists. My forensic investigators tracked every single routing number you tried to hide behind those Cayman Island shell companies. I opened the first folder and slid a printed spreadsheet across the table. I had specifically highlighted the names of the victims in bright yellow marker. Do you want to explain to your lovely wife why her luxurious lifestyle is heavily funded by the stolen retirement accounts of elderly Black people in our own community? I asked, my voice rising in volume for the first time. Do you want to explain how you specifically targeted senior citizens who trusted you to protect their life savings? Terrence shrunk back into his chair, physically unable to look at the paper. Jamal stopped drinking his bourbon, his eyes darting nervously toward the documents. I pulled out another sheet of paper and slid it directly in front of my mother. And Elaine, since you are so incredibly concerned with morality and righteousness, perhaps you can explain this specific transaction. This is a direct wire transfer of $85,000 from the Widow and Orphan Charity Fund at your own church. The exact same church where you proudly sit on the executive board. Terrence drained that account 3 weeks ago to pay the overdue mortgage on this ridiculous house. Your son-in-law is not a struggling businessman who made a simple mistake. He is a vicious financial predator, and he is going to federal prison for a very long time. I am not signing a single piece of paper to help him. And I am certainly not putting my own company in the crosshairs of a federal indictment to save any of you. My father Derek, who had remained entirely silent up until this point, suddenly slammed his fist down hard on the table. The porcelain plates jumped. "Charmaine, that is quite enough," he roared, his face turning a deep, angry shade of purple. "I will not sit here and listen to you disrespect this family in this house. You will lower your voice immediately." I turned my head slowly, locking eyes with my father. "Disrespect the family," I repeated. "He stole from Widow's dad. He stole from the church." "I do not care what the paperwork says," Derek interrupted, pointing a stern, trembling finger directly at my face. "You do not air private family business out in the open, and you certainly do not abandon your blood when they are backed into a corner. We have a pristine reputation in this community. We have a respected name to protect. If Terrence goes down, the massive scandal will ruin all of us. It will completely destroy your mother's standing at the church. It will ruin Jamal's business prospects. You have the immense power to make this go away quietly. You will sign that contract and you will protect the family name just like you were raised to do." I let out a harsh, bitter laugh, shaking my head at the absolute delusion radiating from my father. "Protect the family name?" I asked, standing up from my chair and buttoning my suit jacket. "The family name is already destroyed. The federal government has everything. I am leaving." Before I could even take a single step toward the dining room exit, Chloe's demeanor completely shifted. The desperate, crying, pregnant woman vanished instantly, replaced by the vicious, calculating sister I had known my entire life. She reached under the table and pulled out a thick legal envelope, slamming it down hard right on top of my investigative dossiers. "You are not going anywhere, Charmaine," Chloe threatened, her voice dropping into a cold, menacing sneer. "That right there is a formal legal notice. I filed a strict court injunction against you this morning regarding Grandma's estate." I paused, looking down at the legal envelope. "What are you talking about?" I asked cautiously. "I am telling the judge that you maliciously manipulated Grandma's will 4 years ago." When her mind was failing, Chloe declared with a wicked, triumphant smile, "I am claiming you coerced her into leaving you that huge property. If you do not sit down right now and sign Terrence's public relations contract to save my husband, I swear to God I will drag you through a brutal public civil trial. I will tie up your precious assets in court for years, and I will make absolutely sure you lose that house. You either save my family today, or I destroy everything you have built." I stared at the thick legal envelope Chloe had just slammed onto the table. The sheer audacity of her threat hung in the air, mixing with the scent of the untouched roasted chicken. I did not scream. I did not flinch. I slowly reached out, picked up my thick stack of financial dossiers, and neatly placed them back into my leather briefcase. "You are going to sue me for a house that legally belongs to me using money you stole from a church?" I asked, snapping the briefcase shut. "Good luck finding a lawyer who will take that case on contingency, Chloe, because by tomorrow you will not even have the cash to buy a cup of coffee." I turned my back on all of them. My mother shouted my name, but I did not stop walking. I walked straight out the front door, got into my vehicle, and drove away from that suffocating McMansion. I thought I had the upper hand. I thought my absolute refusal to participate in their fraud would be the end of it. I underestimated just how vicious a desperate family could be. At 6 o'clock the next morning, my phone started ringing incessantly. I was already at the gym, running on the treadmill, trying to clear my head. I ignored the first 3 calls from my head of public relations, but when my lead corporate attorney, Victoria, called back to back, I knew something was horribly wrong. I answered the phone, wiping sweat from my forehead. "Charmaine, you need to get to the office right now," Victoria said, her voice completely devoid of its usual calm demeanor. "We have a massive situation. Check your email. I just sent you a link to the Atlanta Observer." The Atlanta Observer was the most notorious digital gossip and news blog in the city. They were famous for destroying the reputations of high-profile executives, politicians, and socialites with anonymous tips that were almost always legally actionable, but culturally devastating. I opened the link on my phone. The headline made my blood run completely cold. Tech CEO Charmaine built $90 million empire on stolen family wealth and elder abuse. The article was entirely a work of fiction, but it was written with just enough specific, twisted details to sound credible to the general public. The anonymous source, who was incredibly obviously my sister Chloe, claimed that my startup capital was illegally funneled from my grandmother's estate against her dying wishes. The article falsely stated that I had manipulated a dementia-ridden old woman into signing over her assets, completely leaving my struggling, hardworking family in the dust. The piece even included a carefully cropped, blurry photograph of me yelling at my mother in my office lobby from 2 days ago, painting me as a ruthless, abusive daughter who hated her own family. By the time I arrived at my glass-walled corner office, the situation had escalated from a minor nuisance to a full-blown corporate crisis. My assistant Sarah was frantically managing a dozen blinking lines on the main switchboard. 3 of our largest corporate clients had already called to express their extreme concern. In the world of crisis management and public relations, your own reputation must be completely bulletproof. You cannot effectively manage a scandal for a Fortune 500 company when your own name is trending on social media alongside the words elder abuse and fraud. I sat at my heavy oak desk, staring at the rapidly refreshing analytics on my monitor. The article was gaining massive traction. People love a spectacular downfall, especially when it involves a wealthy, independent Black woman. The comments section was already filled with strangers calling me a monster, demanding that my corporate partners drop my firm immediately. Victoria burst into my office carrying a thick stack of printed documents. "We need to issue a cease and desist immediately," she ordered, pacing across the room. "We can file a defamation lawsuit against the blog and against your sister by noon. We have the actual financial records. We can prove every single word in that article is a malicious lie." "No," I said quietly, leaning back in my leather executive chair. Victoria stopped pacing and stared at me. "Charmaine, you are bleeding credibility right now. We have 2 major tech clients threatening to pause their retainer contracts until this blows over. If we do not aggressively control this narrative today, your valuation is going to take a massive hit." I said no. "Victoria," I repeated, my voice steady and cold. "If we sue them right now, it becomes a messy, protracted legal battle. It turns into a he said, she said family drama that the media will drag out for months. I do not want to fight my sister in civil court for the next 3 years. I want to end her entirely. Let the articles stay up. Let them think they have successfully backed me into a corner. Prepare the real financial documents, the ones proving Terrence's federal fraud. Have them ready for distribution." Just as Victoria nodded and walked out of my office, the intercom buzzed. It was Sarah. Her voice was hesitant. "Charmaine, your father is downstairs in the lobby. He is alone. He says he desperately needs to speak with you. He is begging, actually." "Send him up," I commanded. 5 minutes later, my father, Derek, walked into my office. He looked as though he had aged 10 years overnight. His usually perfect posture was completely gone. He was slouching, his expensive suit looked wrinkled, and his hands were trembling slightly. He did not look like the proud, arrogant man who had demanded I lower my voice at the dining room table yesterday. He looked like a broken, terrified old man. He sat down heavily in the leather guest chair across from my desk. "Charmaine." I saw the article, he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I told Chloe not to do it. I told her it was a terrible idea to provoke you, but she is completely out of her mind with panic. She thinks if she destroys your company, you will be forced to sell the cabin and sign Terrence's contract just to get the cash to save yourself." I looked at him with absolute disgust. "So you came here to apologize for her?" I asked sharply. "Or did you come here to threaten me again about protecting the precious family name?" Neither. Derek sighed, looking down at his trembling hands. "I came here to beg you. Please, Charmaine. I am begging you on my knees. Just give Chloe the deed to the cabin. Sign the public relations contract. Blame Terrence's business partner. Just do whatever it takes to keep the federal agents away from Terrence. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the cool glass of my desk. Why do you care so much, Dad? I demanded, my eyes locking onto his. You have never liked Terrence. You always thought he was a flashy, arrogant fool. Why are you suddenly willing to let Chloe destroy my entire life just to keep him out of prison? He swallowed hard, refusing to meet my gaze. He is your sister's husband. He is the father of my future grandchild. Stop lying to me, I snapped, hitting my hand flat against the desk. I read Terrence's financial files. I saw the massive holes in his operating capital. I know exactly how much money he stole, but I also know he needed a massive influx of clean cash to keep the Ponzi scheme running this long. Where did he get that initial injection of clean money, Dad? Derek closed his eyes tightly. Derek closed his. A single tear escaped, rolling down his weathered cheek. Where did he get the money, Derek? I demanded again, my voice echoing loudly in the spacious office. From me, he finally choked out, his voice cracking with immense shame. I gave it to him. I sat back, my mind racing, as the puzzle pieces slammed into place. How, I asked. You and Mom live comfortably, but you do not have that kind of liquid capital sitting around in a checking account. I took out a second mortgage on our house, Derek confessed, completely breaking down. Terrence came to me 2 years ago. He told me he had a guaranteed commercial real estate deal. He promised me he would double my money in 6 months. I did not tell your mother. I secretly leveraged the entire equity of our home, the home we have lived in for 30 years. And I handed the cash directly to Terrence. The sickening truth washed over me. If Terrence's fraudulent company collapses, the bank will seize your house. I stated, my voice devoid of any sympathy. You and Mom will be completely homeless. We will lose everything. Charmaine, he wept, covering his face with his hands. Our home, our reputation in the church, our entire retirement. We will have absolutely nothing. That is why you have to save him. If he goes to federal prison, your mother and I are going to be out on the street. Please, I am begging you as your father, save us. I watched this man, the man who had stood by silently, while my mother threw me out into the winter cold with nothing but a backpack. I watched him cry, terrified of experiencing the exact same financial ruin he had so happily inflicted upon me. I felt no pity. I felt no obligation. I felt a supreme, terrifying sense of absolute clarity. I did not break down. I did not yell. I did not offer him a single word of comfort. Instead, a slow, cold smile spread across my face. I picked up my cell phone from the desk. I opened my messages and started a new text directly to Terrence. I typed the words carefully, making sure my father could hear the clicking of the keys. I will do it, I typed out. I will sign the contract and manage the media narrative. Press conference at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel tomorrow morning at exactly 10 o'clock. Bring the entire family. I hit send. I looked back up at my father, my smile still firmly in place. Go home, Dad? I told him, my voice dangerously calm. Tell Terrence to put on his best suit. Tomorrow I'm going to fix this family's problems once and for all. My father practically ran out of my office. He looked like a man who had just been pardoned from death row. He genuinely believed his tears had broken my resolve. Within 30 minutes of him leaving, my phone buzzed with an alert from a social media monitoring software we use for corporate clients. It was a post from Chloe. She had uploaded a picture of a pristine, heavily filtered nursery with the caption, "God always protects the righteous and family always comes through in the end. A minor setback is just a setup for a major comeback." I did not feel angry looking at her smug, arrogant post. I felt absolute icy focus. I locked the heavy glass door to my executive suite and called Victoria back into the room. I told her to scrap the cease and desist letters completely. I was not going to write a single word of a public relations statement to defend Terrence. I was not going to negotiate with financial terrorists who shared my last name. Instead, we were going to build an inescapable legal cage. David, my lead forensic accountant, walked in carrying 3 heavily encrypted laptops. For the next 12 hours, my corner office operated like a high-level federal command center. I had my cybersecurity team trace the exact origin of the anonymous tip sent to the Atlanta Observer gossip blog. It took my experts less than 20 minutes to pull the digital footprint. The IP address was registered directly to Chloe's personal smartphone. I had Victoria draft a sworn legal affidavit confirming the origin of the defamation, completely locking Chloe into a federal perjury trap if she ever tried to deny her involvement under oath. But the defamation lawsuit was just the appetizer. I needed the absolute killing blow. I instructed David to dig deeper into the county property records regarding my grandmother's estate, the exact same house Chloe had threatened to sue me over at the dinner table. Chloe was entirely convinced she had massive legal leverage, but she was too remarkably stupid to realize Terrence had already destroyed her safety net. Months ago, my proprietary property management software had flagged a massive default on a commercial loan linked directly to Terrence's firm. He had secretly used the deed to my grandmother's house as collateral for a short-term cash injection to keep his Ponzi scheme afloat, forging the family trust signatures to bypass me. When his fraudulent company began running out of fresh cash, the bank quietly foreclosed on the historic property. Terrence had hidden the brutal foreclosure notices from Chloe and my parents, terrified of the fallout. 4 weeks ago, before the FBI raid even happened, that beautiful house went up for a quiet commercial foreclosure auction. I bought it. I used an anonymous corporate shell company based in Delaware to purchase the property in full with clean cash. Chloe was threatening to sue me for a house she thought she still had a rightful claim to, completely unaware that I was already her legal landlord. I had Victoria print out the final notarized deed of ownership. I placed it carefully inside a sleek black presentation folder. Next, I had to ensure Terrence could not just walk out of the hotel and flee the jurisdiction after the press conference. Managing a massive corporate crisis sometimes means working directly with federal authorities to isolate the liability. I used my encrypted line to contact a senior investigator at the white-collar crime division of the FBI. I did not ask for a favor. I offered them a fully wrapped, meticulously documented gift. I provided the lead federal investigator with a secure cloud link containing Terrence's offshore routing numbers, the forged internal documents he tried to force me to sign, and the exact time and location of the press conference. I explicitly told the federal agents that Terrence would be openly confessing to financial crimes in a public venue at 10:30 the next morning. The agent on the phone was stunned by the magnitude of evidence I handed over. They promised to have a tactical team waiting in the wings. By midnight, my preparation was flawless. I contacted the events manager at the Ritz-Carlton and booked their largest grand ballroom using my corporate platinum account. I hired an independent, highly vetted audiovisual team to set up a massive high-definition LED screen directly behind the main speaking podium. I gave the technical director strict, non-negotiable instructions that all media inputs were to be routed exclusively through my personal encrypted tablet. No one else, absolutely no one, would have control over what was projected on that massive screen. I was locking every single door, window, and legal escape route. When the trap finally sprang shut, my family would have absolutely nowhere to run. The next morning, the Atlanta air was thick with humidity and electric anticipation. I arrived at the Ritz-Carlton at 9 o'clock sharp, wearing a tailored charcoal suit that felt like modern armor. The grand ballroom was already packed to maximum capacity. Because of the viral gossip article Chloe had intentionally planted, the local press was incredibly hungry for a messy family scandal. But I had also anonymously invited top financial reporters from major national networks, promising them an unprecedented exclusive look into a massive federal fraud case. The sprawling room buzzed with the chaotic energy of flashing cameras, murmuring reporters checking their audio equipment, and the harsh, bright glare of television broadcasting lighting. At exactly 9:45, my family made their grand entrance. They looked like untouchable royalty arriving at a majestic coronation. They had clearly spent the entire night celebrating their perceived victory over my boundaries. Terrence was wearing a custom navy blue suit, his hair perfectly styled, looking every bit the confident. wealthy executive who had just successfully bought his way out of prison. Chloe walked closely beside him, clutching his arm affectionately for the cameras. She had chosen a soft cream-colored maternity dress, playing the role of the innocent, devoted, and highly stressed pregnant wife to absolute perfection. My mother Elaine and my father Derek walked right behind them, practically glowing with immense pride and overwhelming relief. Elaine was wearing her most expensive Sunday church hat and a heavy pearl necklace, waving politely to the local journalists as if she were a beloved celebrity on a Hollywood red carpet. Jamal swaggered in last, wearing dark designer sunglasses indoors, looking around the opulent ballroom as if he owned the entire hotel franchise. They confidently took their reserved seats in the very front row, completely oblivious to the fact that they were sitting proudly in the front row of their own public execution. At 10 o'clock on the dot, the heavy wooden doors of the ballroom were firmly closed and locked by my private security team. The low murmur of the press instantly quieted down, replaced by the rapid clicking of camera shutters. Terrence stepped confidently up to the wooden podium, adjusting the dual microphones with practiced, arrogant ease. He looked out at the sea of eager reporters, took a deep, highly dramatic breath, and began his carefully rehearsed performance. "Ladies and gentlemen of the press," Terrence started, his voice projecting a perfect, sickening blend of authority and manufactured sorrow. "I stand before you today to address the malicious, completely unfounded rumors surrounding my commercial real estate firm. Yesterday, federal agents visited my offices regarding a gross misappropriation of investor funds. I am entirely heartbroken to announce that my longtime business partner Marcus has deeply betrayed my trust and the sacred trust of our loyal investors. He orchestrated a shadow financial scheme completely without my knowledge or consent." Terrence paused perfectly on cue, wiping a completely fake tear from his eye. Chloe reached out from the front row, softly squeezing his hand in a sickening display of rehearsed marital solidarity. Elaine nodded vigorously, looking around aggressively at the reporters to make sure they were accurately documenting her son-in-law's immense bravery. "We are fully cooperating with the authorities to bring Marcus to justice." Terrence continued, his voice growing much stronger, full of false triumph and arrogance. "And to ensure complete corporate transparency, my family has retained the absolute best crisis management firm in the entire country. Family stands by family in times of crisis. It is my profound honor to introduce my brilliant sister-in-law, the Chief Executive Officer, who will now present the definitive, undeniable evidence that will clear my name entirely." The massive room erupted in a blinding flurry of camera flashes. Terrence stepped back from the microphones, gesturing grandly toward the side stage with a smug, victorious grin plastered across his face. I stood up from my leather chair in the shadows. I did not carry the forged corporate memos he had given me. I did not carry a carefully written public relations statement. I walked slowly and deliberately up the carpeted steps to the podium, looking completely unfazed by the blinding media lights. I stepped up to the microphone holding nothing but a single silver flash drive. I looked out at the sea of eager reporters, their camera lenses reflecting the harsh ballroom lights. Then I slowly shifted my gaze to the front row, where my family sat, bathed in their own manufactured glory. Terrence was still grinning smugly, thoroughly convinced he had successfully manipulated the system one more time. Chloe was still clutching her designer handbag, her face arranged in a mask of perfect supportive innocence. My mother Elaine was sitting up perfectly straight, ready for her moment of borrowed fame, while my father Derek looked relieved that the family name was supposedly being rescued. I inserted the silver flash drive into the secure port on the wooden podium. I tapped the screen of my encrypted tablet, instantly overriding the hotel audiovisual system, just as I had instructed the technical director to do. The massive high-definition screen behind me hummed to life, bathing the entire stage and the front row in a harsh, bright blue glow. "Good morning," I said, my voice echoing clearly through the state-of-the-art sound system. "My name is Charmaine. I am the founder and chief executive officer of the crisis management firm that Terrence just mentioned. He told you that he brought me here today to control a narrative. He told you that family stands by family in times of crisis. He was partially correct. I am indeed here to manage a massive corporate crisis, but I am not here to manage his." The murmurs in the ballroom stopped instantly. The silence was so absolute that I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning vents overhead. Every single reporter lowered their notepad. The camera operators stopped adjusting their lenses. In the front row, Terrence's confident grin froze slowly, morphing into a mask of total confusion. Chloe dropped Terrence's hand, her carefully practiced supportive smile faltering. I tapped my tablet again. The massive screen behind me flashed, displaying a highly detailed, incredibly complex financial spreadsheet. It was not the forged, heavily redacted document Terrence had tried to force me to sign at the dining room table yesterday. It was the unedited raw ledger from his own highly secure internal servers, complete with digital timestamps and authorizing signatures. For the past 48 hours, my elite forensic accounting team has been conducting an independent deep dive investigation into the financial collapse of this commercial real estate firm, I announced, projecting my voice to the very back of the packed room. Terrence just stood up here and publicly blamed his business partner Marcus for a gross misappropriation of funds. He claimed he was a clueless victim of a shadow financial scheme. That is a lie. A verifiable, legally documented lie. I swiped my finger across the tablet. The screen transitioned to a side-by-side comparison of two different banking documents. Marcus did not steal the investor capital. I continued speaking with the cold, measured cadence of a prosecutor delivering an opening statement. Marcus was systematically locked out of the company's primary operating accounts 6 months ago. The documents you see on the screen behind me are the actual wire transfer logs. If you look at the authorized digital signatures on every single outgoing transfer over $50,000, you will not find Marcus's name. You will find the sole authorizing signature of Terrence himself. Terrence's face drained of all color. He looked like he had just been struck by lightning. He took a sudden, panicked step forward toward the podium, his hands reaching out as if he could physically stop the words from coming out of my mouth. But my head of security, Marcus, a heavily built former police officer, immediately stepped out from the shadows of the stage. He placed a massive hand firmly squarely in the center of Terrence's chest, effortlessly pushing the terrified executive back away from the microphones. "What are you doing?" Terrence hissed frantically, his voice cracking with sheer panic, though he was careful not to shout into the open microphones. "Charmaine, turn that screen off right now. Turn it off!" I completely ignored him, turning my attention back to the captivated audience of journalists. "Let us look exactly at where those misappropriated funds went," I said, tapping the screen to bring up a complex web of financial routing numbers. Terrence was not investing this capital into commercial developments. He was running a classic, highly aggressive Ponzi scheme. He established 3 anonymous shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands. He used the incoming capital from new, unsuspecting investors to pay the fabricated dividends of his older investors, entirely masking the fact that the company was bleeding cash. The seasoned financial reporters in the room instantly recognized the magnitude of what I was projecting. This was not a minor public relations scandal. This was a live, meticulously documented exposure of a multi-million-dollar federal crime. Laptops flipped open. Keyboards began clacking furiously. The camera flashes erupted into a blinding continuous strobe light, capturing every single detail of the damning documents I was providing. But Terrence did not just defraud wealthy venture capitalists or faceless corporate hedge funds. I continued, my voice rising slightly to cut through the growing chaotic noise of the press corps. When his Ponzi scheme began to collapse, when he desperately needed fresh, clean cash to keep the federal regulators off his back, he turned to the most vulnerable people in our own community. He specifically targeted the retirement accounts of elderly Black citizens. A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom. The local reporters, the ones who knew the cultural and social landscape of Atlanta, immediately realized the devastating local impact of this betrayal. I swiped to the next slide. It displayed a list of redacted names showing only the ages of the victims and the massive amounts of money that had been systematically drained from their life savings. He promised them safe, high-yield returns on local neighborhood revitalization projects, I explained, pointing directly at the glowing numbers. Instead, he wired their retirement funds directly into his offshore accounts to maintain his own lavish, fraudulent lifestyle. Chloe let out a sharp, breathless gasp. She looked around the room in absolute terror, suddenly realizing that her entire pristine, affluent life was entirely funded by the stolen savings of the elderly. She shrank back into her chair, trying to hide her face from the relentless glare of the cameras. But the journalists in the front row were already pointing their lenses directly at her. But the most egregious theft, I said, allowing my voice to drop into a low, deadly register, occurred just 3 weeks ago. I looked directly down into the front row, locking eyes with my mother. Elaine was gripping the armrests of her chair so tightly that her knuckles were completely white. Her face was a mask of sheer, unadulterated horror. She knew exactly what I was about to say, and she knew there was absolutely nothing she could do to stop it. I tapped the screen one final time. A bank statement appeared highlighting a single massive wire transfer. My mother, Elaine, sits on the executive board of the First Grace Community Church. I stated clearly, watching Elaine flinch violently at the mention of her sacred institution. It is a cornerstone of our community. For decades, that church has maintained a specific charity fund dedicated to supporting widows and orphans. It pays for emergency medical bills, winter heating costs, and food for families who have absolutely nothing. 3 weeks ago, Terrence accessed that specific charity account. He wired $85,000 of church donation money directly to a private escrow company to cover the overdue mortgage on his own luxury suburban estate. The ballroom absolutely exploded. The remaining shred of decorum shattered instantly. Reporters jumped to their feet, shouting questions at the top of their lungs, completely abandoning professional courtesy in a desperate race to get the story. Is this information currently in the hands of federal prosecutors? A reporter from a national financial network screamed over the noise. Did his wife know about the stolen church funds? A local news anchor shouted, pointing a microphone aggressively toward a cowering Chloe. Elaine looked as though she was going to physically vomit. Her perfect, respectable church lady facade, the pristine image she had spent 35 years viciously protecting and demanding I bow down to, disintegrated into dust on live television. The social death she had always feared was happening right in front of her eyes. She put her hands over her face, completely unable to look at the angry, disgusted faces of the local reporters who were now aggressively questioning her complicity. Derek sat frozen beside her, paralyzed by the sudden, violent destruction of his family's reputation. Terrence was hyperventilating. He looked wildly around the room, trapped like a rat in a burning building. He tried to shove his way past my security guard again, screaming frantically at the audiovisual team in the back of the room to cut the power to the massive screen. But the tech crew, entirely loyal to my payroll and my strict instructions, completely ignored his desperate commands. The Cayman Island bank statements and the church wire transfers remained brilliantly illuminated for every single camera in the room to record. I stood calmly at the podium, a fortress of absolute composure, amidst the raging hurricane I had just unleashed. I did not raise my voice over the shouting reporters. I did not break a sweat. I simply watched the man who had happily participated in throwing me out onto the street face the brutal, unavoidable consequences of his own arrogance. I am releasing a secure encrypted link to every accredited journalist in this room. I announced calmly into the microphone, my voice cutting through the chaos one last time. This link contains the raw data, the internal emails, and the complete offshore routing history, proving everything I have just shown you. You have the truth. Do your jobs. Terrence let out a guttural scream of pure defeat. He turned around desperately, looking for an exit, but the heavy wooden doors at the back of the ballroom were still firmly closed. He was entirely trapped in a cage built of his own lies, and I was the one holding the key. As Terrence's guttural scream of pure defeat echoed through the ballroom, the temporary paralysis that had gripped my sister finally snapped. Chloe shot up from her front row seat, the elegant cream-colored maternity dress, suddenly looking completely out of place against her violently contorted expression. Her carefully practiced facade of the supportive wealthy wife was entirely gone. In its place was a desperate cornered animal. She spun around, pointing a shaking, manicured finger toward the back of the massive room where the technical crew was stationed. "Turn that screen off right this second." Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking hysterically over the chaotic roar of the press corps. I will sue this entire hotel. I will have all of your jobs. Cut the power to that projector right now. The audiovisual team did not even flinch. They stood behind their heavy mixing boards, their arms crossed, looking directly at me for their orders. The brilliantly illuminated bank statements detailing Terrence's massive federal fraud continued to glow brightly against the back wall, immortalized by 100 flashing camera lenses. Realizing that her demands were completely powerless, Chloe turned her vicious rage directly toward me. She hiked up the skirt of her expensive silk dress and aggressively stomped up the carpeted stairs to the podium. "You jealous, lying monster!" she screamed, stepping right into the harsh glare of the stage lights. She tried to physically shove me away from the microphones, but my security guard Marcus immediately stepped between us. He did not touch her, but his massive frame was an impenetrable wall that forced her to step back. Unable to physically attack me, Chloe grabbed the secondary microphone on the podium, gripping it so tightly her knuckles turned white. She looked out at the frenzy of reporters, her eyes wide and manic, desperately trying to wrestle back control of the public narrative. "Do not listen to a single word this bitter woman says," Chloe shouted into the microphone, her breath hitching with dramatic forced sobs. "Her name is Charmaine, and she is my estranged sister. She is a deeply disturbed, vindictive person who has spent the last 4 years plotting against our family because she is incredibly jealous of our success. These documents are entirely fabricated. She runs a cybersecurity firm. She knows how to manipulate digital files and forge bank statements. This is nothing but a malicious smear campaign." The reporters did not stop taking pictures, but a few of them paused their frantic typing to listen to her desperate spin. Chloe saw this tiny sliver of hesitation and immediately doubled down, deciding to play what she believed was her ultimate trump card. "She is doing this because she is completely terrified," Chloe continued, her voice echoing loudly across the grand ballroom. "Just yesterday morning, I filed a strict legal injunction against her in state court. She stole our late grandmother's entire estate. When my grandmother's mind was failing from severe dementia, Charmaine secretly manipulated her into signing over a historic, multi-million-dollar property. She committed gross elder abuse, and now that my husband and I are finally bringing her to justice, she is staging this ridiculous media stunt to destroy my husband's immaculate corporate reputation." A loud murmur rippled through the crowd of journalists. Elder abuse and stolen family inheritance were explosive allegations that perfectly matched the anonymous gossip article published that very morning. My mother, Elaine, who was still sitting frozen in the front row, nodded her head frantically, desperately trying to validate Chloe's wild accusations. My father, Derek, looked down at his shoes, unable to watch the spectacular train wreck unfolding on the stage. "You are a complete fraud," Charmaine Chloe sneered, turning away from the crowd to glare at me with absolute unadulterated hatred. "You thought you could come in here and ruin my husband with fake spreadsheets. You thought you could distract the press from the fact that you stole a house from a dying old woman. You are going to lose everything. You are going to lose your company, your reputation, and I promise you I am taking back that house." Chloe stood there breathing heavily into the microphone, thoroughly convinced she had just masterfully saved her family from federal ruin. She thought she had successfully flipped the script, painting me as the true villain of the story. Terrence looked up at her from the floor, his face pale and dripping with sweat, silently pleading with her to stop talking. But Chloe was too blinded by her own manufactured arrogance to notice her husband's absolute terror. I waited for her chest to stop heaving. I waited for the murmurs in the crowd to settle down into a tense, heavy silence. I looked at my sister, feeling a profound sense of closure. She had just publicly dug her own grave on national television. I reached down and calmly picked up the sleek black presentation folder I had brought with me. I unclasped it and pulled out a single heavily stamped legal document. I did not yell. I did not match her frantic energy. I simply leaned into my microphone and let the cold, undeniable truth shatter her entire world. "You want to sue me for Grandma's house, Chloe?" I asked, my voice deadly calm, slicing through the heavy air of the ballroom. The reporters instantly leaned forward, hanging on my every word. Are you talking about the beautiful historic colonial property that our grandmother left to me in her legally verified ironclad will? Yes, I am, Chloe spat back defiantly. And the judge is going to hand it right back to me. I slowly shook my head, projecting a look of profound pity that I knew would infuriate her. You cannot sue me for a house that your own husband already lost to the bank, Chloe. Chloe froze. The defiant sneer melted off her face, replaced by total confusion. What are you talking about? She whispered, genuinely bewildered. I held up the legal document for the cameras to see. 6 months ago, when Terrence's massive Ponzi scheme began running out of fresh cash, he desperately needed collateral to secure a short-term commercial loan, but all of his own assets were already secretly leveraged. So he forged the family trust signatures. He used the deed to our grandmother's house, the house you are currently living in, as collateral for a massive high-interest loan from a private lender. Chloe turned her head slowly, looking down at Terrence. Terrence could not meet her eyes. He dropped his head into his hands, letting out a pathetic, quiet whimper. No, Chloe gasped, her voice barely audible over the sudden clicking of the cameras. No, you are lying. We own that house. You own absolutely nothing, I stated, my voice echoing relentlessly. Terrence defaulted on that loan 4 months ago. He hid the notices from you. He hid the warnings. The private lender quietly foreclosed on the historic property before the federal raid even happened. The house went up for a private commercial foreclosure auction just 4 weeks ago. Chloe started shaking violently. She dropped the microphone, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. And because I refused to let this family's toxic legacy destroy something my grandmother worked so hard to build, I bought it. I declared, holding the deed high. I used an anonymous corporate shell company registered in Delaware to purchase the property in full with clean cash. I am the sole legal owner of the estate. I turned my head and looked directly into my sister's terrified, tear-filled eyes. You are not bringing me to justice, Chloe. You are attempting to sue your own landlord, and as your legal landlord, I find your husband's criminal activities to be a gross violation of your lease agreement. A collective gasp erupted from the press corps. The absolute brutality of the revelation hit the room like a physical shockwave. In fact, I continued checking the sleek silver watch on my wrist. I had my property management team wait until exactly 10:30 this morning. At this very moment, a formal 30-day eviction notice is being nailed to your custom mahogany front door. You have 30 days to pack up your designer clothes and vacate my property before the county sheriff physically removes you. Chloe's knees completely buckled. She collapsed right there on the stage, her expensive silk dress pooling around her on the carpet. She let out a devastating, soul-crushing wail, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony. It was not a fake theatrical cry. It was the sound of a woman realizing her entire affluent, pristine reality was a complete illusion, and she was now utterly broke, homeless, and married to a federal criminal. Terrence did not move to comfort her. My mother Elaine just sat in the front row, staring blankly at the wall, her mouth hanging slightly open as her brain completely short-circuited from the trauma of the public humiliation. The reporters were in an absolute frenzy, shouting questions, recording Chloe's breakdown, and documenting the complete destruction of a supposedly elite family. I stood tall at the podium, completely untouched by the chaos swirling around me. The legal cage was fully locked. The truth was out. The vengeance I had spent 4 years quietly building was finally complete. But out of the corner of my eye, I caught a sudden movement in the shadows. While the cameras were focused entirely on Chloe's breakdown on the stage, my older brother Jamal had quietly slipped out of his front row seat. He was creeping along the dark velvet-draped wall of the ballroom, keeping his head down, desperately trying to sneak out through the heavy wooden service doors in the back. He thought he could escape the blast radius. He thought his hands were clean. I leaned forward into the microphone, my voice cutting through the deafening noise of the room like a gunshot. "Where exactly do you think you are going, Jamal?" I asked, the amplified sound stopping him dead in his tracks. Jamal froze, his hand hovering just inches from the brass handle of the heavy wooden exit doors. Every single camera in the massive ballroom whipped around to focus entirely on him. The blinding spotlight shifted instantly, casting a harsh, unforgiving glare on his suddenly pale and sweating face. He slowly turned around, his trademark arrogant swagger completely evaporating under the crushing weight of 100 staring eyes. "I did not do anything," Jamal stammered, raising his hands in a pathetic, trembling gesture of surrender. "I am just trying to get some fresh air. This has absolutely nothing to do with me." I tapped the screen of my tablet, advancing to the final slide of my presentation. A massive high-resolution scan of a legal banking document appeared on the glowing screen behind me. It was a domestic corporate incorporation form for a company called Apex Consulting Solutions. "Really?" I asked, leaning forward on the wooden podium and staring directly at my brother. "Because according to the Federal Corporate Registry, you are the sole registered owner, the primary shareholder, and the chief executive officer of Apex Consulting Solutions." Jamal swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically between the giant screen and the swarm of aggressive reporters. "Yeah, so what Terrence helped me set up a private consulting business last year. There is absolutely no law against being an entrepreneur." "You are right," I replied smoothly, my voice echoing off the walls. "But there are very strict federal laws against using a fake consulting business as a domestic funnel for stolen funds." I pointed to the highlighted sections on the massive screen. For Terrence to successfully move the stolen money from the victim's retirement accounts to his offshore Cayman Islands shell companies, he needed a domestic intermediary. He needed an account that looked legitimate enough to pass basic banking algorithms, but was controlled by someone incredibly desperate and easy to manipulate. He needed a willing scapegoat, so he used you. The murmuring in the room grew louder. Journalists started typing furiously on their laptops again. Over the last 18 months, I explained detailing the exact financial mechanics for the captivated press corps. Terrence wired over $2 million of stolen investor capital directly into the Apex Consulting operating account. Jamal, in exchange for a generous 10% management fee, which he happily used to buy designer suits, luxury watches, and expensive bourbon, signed the authorization forms transferring the remaining 90% into Terrence's offshore accounts. "I did not know it was stolen money," Jamal shouted, his voice cracking with sheer unfiltered panic. "Terrence told me it was just a high-level corporate tax strategy. He told me it was completely legal. He just handed me the paperwork and told me exactly where to sign. I did not ask any questions. I trusted my own brother-in-law." "Ignorance is not a valid legal defense for federal wire fraud," Jamal restated coldly, completely stripping away his pathetic excuses. "The Federal Bureau of Investigation does not care if you were too lazy or too stupid to read the legal documents you signed. Your signature is on every single outgoing wire transfer. Your personal name is on the dummy accounts. When the federal indictment comes down, they are not just looking at Terrence. They are looking directly at you as a willing and active accessory to a multi-million-dollar criminal conspiracy. You are looking at a minimum of 10 years in a federal penitentiary." Jamal stared at me, his mouth opening and closing silently like a suffocating fish out of water. The brutal reality of his situation crashed into him with the devastating force of a freight train. His luxurious, entitled life of coasting on other people's money was permanently over. He was going to federal prison, and he had willingly signed the paperwork himself. He slowly turned his head to look at Terrence. Terrence was still cowering near the front row, clutching his torn suit jacket, looking at Jamal with wide, terrified eyes. "You set me up," Jamal whispered, the terrifying realization twisting his face into a dark mask of pure, unadulterated rage. "You used my name. You used me as your human shield to protect yourself." "Jamal, please calm down and listen to me," Terrence pleaded, taking a cautious, trembling step backward. "I had a plan. My defense lawyers were going to figure it all out. We were going to make Marcus take the fall for the domestic accounts, too. I was protecting the family." "Protecting the family," Jamal roared, his voice echoing violently across the grand ballroom. "You threw me directly under the bus to save your own skin. You ruined my entire life." Before anyone could react or intervene, Jamal launched himself across the room. He tackled Terrence with terrifying speed and sheer ferocity. The two men crashed hard into the first row of chairs, knocking over a heavy metal lighting stand with a deafening metallic crash. Chloe screamed at the top of her lungs, scrambling backward on her hands and knees to get away from the violent, explosive brawl. My father, Derek, jumped back in horror. My mother, Elaine, shrieked hysterically, covering her ears as her precious son and son-in-law began tearing each other apart on the carpet. Jamal was throwing wild, heavy punches, striking Terrence repeatedly in the face and chest. Terrence threw his arms up, desperately trying to protect his head, but Jamal was blinded by absolute consuming fury. He grabbed Terrence by the lapels of his expensive custom suit and slammed him violently backward against the wooden edge of the stage. "You ruined my life!" Jamal screamed, spit flying from his mouth as he landed another vicious blow to Terrence's jaw. "I am going to kill you. I swear to God, I am going to kill you." The press corps erupted into complete unmanageable chaos. Camera operators rushed forward eagerly, capturing every single second of the humiliating, violent spectacle. My security chief, Marcus, alongside 3 other massive, highly trained guards, sprang immediately into action. They rushed down the carpeted steps of the stage and forcefully pried the 2 bleeding men apart. It took 3 massive guards to fully restrain Jamal, who was still kicking and thrashing wildly, screaming vicious obscenities at Terrence. Terrence lay groaning on the floor, his nose bleeding profusely, his expensive suit violently torn and covered in dust. This was the absolute pinnacle of their total destruction. The wealthy, elite, untouchable family that had looked down on me for my entire life was literally rolling around on the floor of a hotel ballroom, bleeding and crying in front of national news cameras. "Stop it! Stop this immediately!" The shrill, authoritative voice of my mother, Elaine, pierced sharply through the chaotic noise of the room. She had finally snapped out of her paralyzing shock. She stood up from the wreckage of the front row seats, her posture rigidly straight, her face flushed with indignant, righteous rage. She frantically smoothed down the front of her expensive dress, adjusted her church hat, and marched directly toward the cluster of journalists. "Turn off those cameras right now," Elaine demanded, using her loudest, most commanding church elder voice, a tone she usually reserved for scolding disobedient children in Sunday school. She pointed her manicured finger aggressively at a local television cameraman. "Have you people absolutely no shame? Have you no basic human decency? This is a private family matter. We are going through a difficult spiritual trial, and you are exploiting us like animals in a cage. I demand that you turn them off immediately." The reporters completely ignored her. The cameras kept flashing relentlessly, capturing her desperate, pathetic attempt to regain control of a public narrative that was already reduced to ashes. Elaine turned back toward the podium, glaring up at me with a look of pure, concentrated venom. "Charmaine, shut this down right now," she ordered, her voice trembling with intense rage. "You have made your point. You have successfully humiliated us. Now you are going to call off your security guards, and you are going to help us clean up this massive mess. You are going to protect the reputation of this family before we are entirely ruined in this community. We are faithful, highly respected members of the First Grace Community Church, and I will absolutely not allow you to destroy our sacred standing." I looked down at her, feeling absolutely nothing but cold, clinical detachment. "You destroyed your own standing, Elaine," I said calmly. "And as for your precious church community, I think they already know exactly who you are." I gestured gracefully toward the middle section of the ballroom seating. Throughout the entire explosive press conference, a small group of specially invited guests had been sitting quietly in the 4th row. I had sent them VIP invitations yesterday afternoon, telling them that my crisis management firm was making a major charitable announcement regarding community revitalization. A tall, distinguished man in a dark tailored suit stood up from the 4th row. He had silver hair, kind eyes, and a deeply sorrowful expression etched across his face. It was Pastor Davis, the head minister of the First Grace Community Church, the man who had baptized me, the man my mother worshipped, respected, and feared more than anyone else in her entire world. Elaine froze instantly. All the righteous, indignant anger drained from her body in a single terrifying second. Her face turned an unnatural, sickly shade of gray. "Pastor Davis," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the remaining murmurs of the crowd. "What are you doing here?" Pastor Davis stepped out into the center aisle. He did not look angry. He looked profoundly devastated, which I knew would hurt my mother far more than any shouting match ever could. He slowly walked toward the front of the room, looking at the bloody scene on the floor, looking at Chloe weeping in the corner, and finally looking directly at Elaine. I came here today to support Charmaine's new community initiative. Pastor Davis said, his deep, resonant voice carrying effortlessly across the suddenly quieted room. But instead, I have witnessed a tragedy of unimaginable proportions. Pastor, please, you have to listen to me. Elaine begged, taking a desperate step toward him, with her hands clasped tightly together in prayer. Do not listen to her. Charmaine is deeply confused. It is all a terrible misunderstanding. We did not know anything about Terrence's business dealings. We are completely innocent. We are faithful servants of the Lord. Pastor Davis stopped walking. He looked at Elaine with a mixture of absolute disgust and profound pity. He had seen the financial wire transfers on the massive screen. He had seen the specific dates, the massive dollar amounts, and the clear, undeniable proof that the Widow and Orphan Charity Fund had been entirely drained just to pay for Terrence's luxury mortgage. Elaine, you knew Terrence stole from the church orphanage fund, and you tried to cover it up. The family's perfect social facade shattered into a million pieces on live television. The silence that followed Pastor Davis's question was heavier and more suffocating than anything I had ever experienced. The entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. My mother, Elaine, stood completely frozen, her eyes wide with a terror so profound it looked as though she were staring directly into the abyss. She opened her mouth to speak, to spin another web of religious platitudes, but no words came out. The absolute moral authority of the church, the only currency she had ever truly valued, had just declared her spiritually bankrupt. My father, Derek, who had spent his entire life passively enabling her toxic behavior, suddenly snapped. He lunged forward, grabbing Elaine tightly by the arm. You knew, Derek screamed, his voice cracking, with a mixture of betrayal and sheer panic. You knew he took the church money, and you did not say a word to me. Elaine tried to pull her arm away, her face twisting into a defensive snarl. I did it for us, Derek, she shrieked back at him, all pretense of elegance entirely gone. We were going to lose the house. We were going to be out on the street. Do not you dare act like you are completely innocent. You gave Terrence our equity. You handed our entire life savings over to a con artist. The screaming match escalated with terrifying speed. Jamal, still restrained by my security team, began shouting obscenities at both of our parents, blaming them for pushing him into Terrence's fake consulting business. Terrence was still on the floor, bleeding onto the expensive carpet, crying hysterically, while Chloe continued to weep into her hands. It was a complete, spectacular family meltdown broadcast live across every major news network in the city. The reporters did not even have to ask questions anymore. They just kept their cameras rolling as my family viciously tore each other apart, airing every single dirty secret and financial betrayal they had hidden behind their manicured lawns and Sunday church hats for decades. I stood at the podium watching the fiery destruction of the family unit that had once cast me out into the cold. I felt absolutely no guilt. I felt no urge to step in and mediate. I had simply handed them the matches, and they had enthusiastically burned their own house down. But this public humiliation was only the social execution. The legal execution was running precisely on schedule. I checked my watch. It was exactly 10:45 in the morning. At that very second, the heavy double doors at the back of the grand ballroom did not just open. They were violently shoved apart. A loud, commanding voice boomed over the chaotic screaming of my family and the frantic clicking of the press cameras. Federal agents. Nobody move. Stay exactly where you are. Over a dozen men and women wearing dark tactical jackets with the bright yellow letters of the Federal Bureau of Investigation emblazoned across their backs swarmed into the room. They moved with terrifying practiced precision. They did not care about the flashing cameras. They did not care about the high-profile journalists or the opulent surroundings of the Ritz-Carlton. They had a singular, devastating purpose. This was not some dramatic, cinematic coincidence. This was not a lucky break. This was the direct result of the encrypted digital package I had personally delivered to the senior investigator 24 hours ago. I had not just given them the offshore routing numbers and the forged corporate memos. I had given them the exact itinerary of this press conference, serving my brother-in-law and my own brother up on a silver platter. I had strategically gathered all the conspirators into one perfectly lit, highly publicized room, so the federal authorities would not have to spend weeks tracking them down one by one across the city. The lead agent, a tall, imposing man with a stern face, marched straight down the center aisle, his eyes locked dead onto the bloody, disheveled figure of Terrence. The sea of reporters instantly parted, scrambling out of the way to give the heavily armed federal agents a clear path. The journalists were absolutely frantic, their cameras working in overdrive to capture the unprecedented sight of a federal raid happening live in the middle of a corporate press conference. The relentless clicking of camera shutters echoed like machine gun fire as the press corps captured every second of the historic downfall. Terrence scrambled backward on the carpet like a cornered crab, his hands slipping on his own blood. "No, wait, please," Terrence begged, crying openly as the heavy boots of the federal agents surrounded him. "I was going to turn myself in. I have a lawyer. You have to let me call my lawyer." The lead agent did not even blink. "Terrence Williams, you are under arrest for multiple counts of federal wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes." The agent stated, his voice completely devoid of emotion as he reached to his tactical belt and unclipped a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Two agents reached down, grabbed Terrence by the shoulders of his torn, expensive custom suit, and hauled him roughly to his feet. They slammed him face first against the edge of the stage. The harsh metallic click of the handcuffs snapping shut echoed loudly over the microphones. Terrence sobbed loudly, a pathetic, broken sound that completely shattered his carefully crafted illusion of the untouchable corporate titan. The man who had arrogantly demanded I commit corporate fraud for him just yesterday was now crying like a frightened child in front of the entire world. While Terrence was being secured, another group of agents moved directly toward Jamal. My security guards immediately stepped back, raising their hands to show they were complying with the federal authorities. Jamal did not try to fight. He did not try to run. The paralyzing reality of his situation had finally set in. He fell to his knees, raising his hands in the air, his eyes wide with sheer terror. "Jamal Davis, you are being detained for questioning regarding your involvement with Apex Consulting Solutions and suspected money laundering activities," an agent announced, pulling Jamal's arms forcefully behind his back and securing his wrists with thick plastic zip ties. Chloe, who had been sitting on the floor in a state of catatonic shock, suddenly snapped back to reality as the agents began dragging her husband away. She scrambled to her feet, her cream-colored designer maternity dress stained with dirt and tears. She lunged toward Terrence, but a female federal agent immediately stepped in her path, holding up a firm hand to keep her back. "You lied to me!" Chloe screamed, her voice tearing through her throat, sounding raw and completely unhinged. She pointed a shaking finger at Terrence's face as the agents marched him toward the exit. "You told me we were rich. You told me everything was fine. You stole from old people. You lost my house. You lost my entire life." Terrence did not look back at her. He kept his head down, desperately trying to hide his bleeding face from the relentless barrage of camera flashes. Chloe fell heavily to her knees, completely uncaring about who was watching her. She slammed her fists against the carpet, wailing in absolute agony. Her entire identity was built on the foundation of being better than everyone else, of being the wealthy, successful golden child who constantly looked down on her estranged sister. Now she was nothing more than the broke, soon-to-be evicted wife of a convicted felon. She was entirely ruined, and she finally knew it. The federal agents marched Terrence and Jamal out the back doors, the chaotic swarm of reporters following closely behind them, shouting questions and shoving microphones toward the arrested men. The grand ballroom, which had been packed with hundreds of people just moments ago, suddenly felt incredibly vast and empty. The flashing lights disappeared. The shouting faded into the distant hotel corridors. The once majestic Ritz-Carlton ballroom now resembled a chaotic war zone littered with abandoned notepads, trampled floral arrangements, and the shattered remnants of my family's fabricated prestige. Only a few people remained in the quiet room. My private security team stood silently by the stage. Pastor Davis had walked out the side door without another word, shaking his head in absolute sorrow. Chloe was still weeping uncontrollably on the floor, and standing amidst the total wreckage of the front row were my parents, Elaine and Derek. They stood shoulder to shoulder looking around at the overturned chairs, the knocked-over lighting stands, and the sheer devastation of their lives. The reality of their situation crashed down upon them with the absolute weight of a collapsing concrete building. Terrence was going to federal prison for decades. Jamal was facing serious federal charges and would likely be incarcerated as well. Chloe was completely bankrupt, facing impending homelessness with a child on the way. The prestigious church community they had worshipped for social status now knew they were deeply complicit in stealing money from vulnerable widows and innocent orphans. And because Derek had secretly mortgaged their family home to blindly fund Terrence's massive Ponzi scheme, the bank was going to legally seize their property within a matter of weeks. They were entirely ruined, financially broken beyond repair, socially humiliated on a national scale, legally exposed to ongoing investigations. They had absolutely nowhere to turn. They had no wealthy friends left to manipulate. They had no hidden retirement accounts left to quietly drain. Every single bridge they had ever built on a foundation of lies was currently burning to the ground. Slowly, almost simultaneously, Elaine and Derek raised their heavy heads. They looked past the pathetic weeping figure of Chloe on the carpet. They looked past the wooden podium where I had systematically dismantled their entire existence. They turned their desperate, terrified eyes up to the stage. They looked directly at me, the scapegoat, the ungrateful daughter they had gleefully thrown away like garbage 4 years ago. They suddenly realized I was the only person left in their entire shattered world who still possessed immense wealth, legal power, and a secure home. The heavy wooden doors at the back of the grand ballroom finally swung shut, cutting off the frantic shouting of the press corps and the distant fading wail of federal sirens. The sudden silence that fell over the massive room was deafening. Just minutes ago, this space had been a chaotic arena of flashing lights, aggressive reporters, and a family completely tearing itself apart on live television. Now it was nothing more than an empty, trashed hotel ballroom. Overturned chairs lay scattered across the expensive carpet. A shattered water glass sparkled under the harsh stage lights. The massive high-definition screen behind me had finally gone dark. I stood perfectly still at the wooden podium, looking down at the absolute wreckage of my blood relatives. My security chief Marcus stood silently a few feet away, his arms crossed over his chest, his eyes locked carefully on my parents to ensure they did not try anything desperate. But Elaine and Derek did not look like people capable of physical violence anymore. They looked like empty, hollowed-out shells of the arrogant, demanding people who had ambushed me in my corporate lobby just a few days prior. Elaine was the first to move. She took a slow, trembling step toward the edge of the stage. Her expensive Sunday church hat, the ultimate symbol of her fabricated social superiority, sat slightly crooked on her head. Her immaculate makeup was completely ruined, streaked with heavy black mascara and genuine tears of terror. All the righteous fury, the religious grandstanding, and the bitter entitlement had completely evaporated from her body. She reached her shaking hands out toward me, grabbing the edge of the carpeted stage as if she were a drowning woman clinging to a life raft. "Charmaine, please, Elaine," whispered her voice, incredibly small, cracking with a pathetic desperation I had never heard from her before. "Please, you have to listen to me. I am so sorry. I am so incredibly sorry for everything. I was wrong. I was so wrong about Terrence, and I was wrong about you." I did not move. I did not soften my expression. I just stared down at her, watching the woman who had happily thrown me away try to desperately glue the pieces of her shattered life back together. "You have to help us, Charmaine," she begged, the tears flowing freely down her cheeks now. "Terrence is going to jail. Chloe has absolutely nothing. And Jamal. Oh God, Jamal. He is your brother, Charmaine. He is your own flesh and blood. He made a terrible, stupid mistake, But he is not a criminal mastermind. He was just trying to impress Terrence. He was just trying to be a successful businessman. If they put him in a federal penitentiary, it will completely destroy him. She fell to her knees at the edge of the stage, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently with heavy sobs. "You have so much money, Charmaine," she cried, looking back up at me with wide, pleading eyes. "You can afford the absolute best federal defense attorneys in the entire country. You can pay Jamal's bail. You can hire a legal team to negotiate a plea deal so he does not have to spend decades behind bars. Please, as your mother, I am begging you to save your brother's life." Before I could even process the sheer audacity of her request, my father Derek stepped forward. He walked with a heavy, dragging limp, his shoulders slumped in total agonizing defeat. He stood next to my kneeling mother, looking up at me with eyes that were red swollen and filled with a profound, consuming panic. "Charmaine, I know I failed you." Derek choked out his voice, trembling violently. "I know I stood by and let this happen. I was a coward. I was too terrified of the scandal to tell your mother what Terrence was actually doing with our money. But you have to understand my position. I was just trying to protect the family home. I was trying to make sure we had a secure future." I let out a short, cold breath, my hands resting lightly on the edges of the wooden podium. "You secured your future by mortgaging your house to fund a Ponzi scheme, Dad." I stated, my voice completely devoid of any sympathy. I know it was stupid." He wept aggressively, wiping the tears from his face. "But the bank is going to take the house, Charmaine. They are going to foreclose on the property within the month. Your mother and I will be out on the street. We have absolutely zero retirement savings left. The church is going to permanently excommunicate us by the end of the week. We have nowhere to go. We have nobody else to turn to." Derek took a desperate step closer to the stage, looking up at me as if I were a deity who could miraculously rewrite the laws of financial consequence. "Please, Charmaine," he begged, his voice dropping into a pathetic, whiny plea. "Just pay off the second mortgage. That is all I am asking for. It is a fraction of what your company is worth. You would not even notice the money leaving your account. I will work for you. I will do whatever it takes. I will clean the floors of your office building every single night. Just do not let the bank take the house where you grew up. Do not let your mother and me die in poverty." I stood there in the quiet ballroom listening to their desperate, pathetic bargaining. They were not apologizing because they suddenly realized the immense pain they had caused me. They were not crying because they regretted destroying my early 20s, forcing me into crushing debt, or kicking me out into the freezing winter rain. They were crying because they had completely run out of options. They were apologizing to my bank account, not to me. I looked at Elaine, kneeling on the floor in her ruined designer clothes. I looked at Derek, a broken, terrified old man who had sacrificed his own daughter to protect a criminal son-in-law. I thought about my pale blue childhood bedroom, the room Elaine had forced upon me. I thought about the $25,000 I had saved from years of grueling freelance coding, the money they had ruthlessly stolen to buy Terrence a luxury sports car. I thought about the freezing night they packed my bags and slammed the heavy front door in my face. I picked up my encrypted tablet from the podium and slowly walked down the carpeted stairs of the stage. Marcus immediately stepped forward, positioning himself slightly behind my right shoulder, ready to intervene if either of my parents tried to physically grab me. But they did not move. They just looked up at me with wide, desperately hopeful eyes, genuinely believing that their tears and their pathetic groveling had finally broken through my cold exterior. I stopped a few feet away from them. I looked down at the two people who had brought me into this world, feeling an incredible, overwhelming sense of absolute nothingness. There was no anger left. There was no sadness. There was only a cold, clinical detachment. "I am not paying Jamal's federal bail," I said, my voice quiet, steady, and razor-sharp. "I am not hiring a defense attorney to save a grown man who happily facilitated the theft of millions of dollars from elderly people. He signed the corporate documents. He spent the stolen money. He can sit in a federal holding cell and face the absolute consequences of his own overwhelming greed." Elaine let out a sharp, devastated gasp, clutching her chest, as if I had just physically stabbed her. "Charmaine, you cannot do this," she sobbed hysterically. "You cannot abandon your family like this." I turned my eyes to Derek. "And I am absolutely not paying off your second mortgage?" I continued, watching the last sliver of hope completely drain from his weathered face. "You chose to secretly leverage your home to fund a criminal. You chose to protect Terrence instead of protecting your own financial security. You made your bed, Dad. Now you get to lose it to the bank." Derek's mouth fell open, a silent scream of total despair trapped in his throat. He fell to his knees right next to my mother, completely broken. "You are a monster!" Elaine suddenly shrieked, the desperate begging instantly reverting back to her true vicious nature. She glared up at me, her face twisted in pure, unadulterated hatred. "You are a cold, heartless, evil monster. We are your family." I looked down at her without a single shred of empathy. 4 years ago, you told me I was a selfish failure and that family was a privilege I did not deserve, I said, delivering the words with the absolute crushing weight of a final judge's gavel. You were right. I do not have a family. I did not wait for her to scream another insult. I did not wait for my father to start begging again. I simply turned my back on them. I raised my hand and gave a sharp, definitive nod to Marcus. "Let us go," I commanded. I walked away from the stage, my expensive heels clicking sharply and rhythmically against the ballroom floor. I did not look back. I walked straight through the heavy wooden doors, leaving the wreckage of my past entirely behind me. I walked through the opulent, hushed lobby of the Ritz-Carlton, where the hotel staff stared at me with a mixture of shock and profound respect. As I pushed through the revolving glass doors and stepped out into the blinding, beautiful Atlanta sun, the chaotic wails of my mother echoing from the distant ballroom finally faded into complete silence. The warm summer air hit my face, and for the first time in 35 years, I took a deep, completely unrestricted breath. I was entirely free. The immediate aftermath of the press conference moved with the terrifying speed of a Category 5 hurricane making landfall. I did not watch the fallout from the front lines. I watched it from the pristine safety of my corner office, receiving real-time updates from Victoria, my lead corporate attorney, and my crisis management team. The national media descended on my family like starving vultures. The Atlanta Observer, the very gossip blog Chloe had tried to use to destroy me, completely flipped its narrative within hours, publishing a massive exposé on Terrence's staggering fraud and the family's deep complicity. Within 48 hours, the federal prosecutors officially charged Terrence with 15 counts of wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. The moment Terrence realized he was facing decades in a maximum security federal penitentiary, his arrogant, wealthy executive persona completely vanished. He did exactly what cowards always do when cornered. He immediately turned on the person he perceived as the weakest link. He threw my brother Jamal directly to the federal wolves. Terrence offered the prosecutors a comprehensive plea deal, providing them with extensive digital logs and recorded phone calls proving that Jamal was not just a naive pawn, but a highly active participant who had knowingly signed off on the transfer of stolen funds to the Cayman Islands. Terrence hoped throwing his brother-in-law under the bus would secure him a lighter sentence. The strategy backfired spectacularly. The federal judge, absolutely disgusted by Terrence's predatory targeting of the elderly, and the church rejected the plea deal entirely. Terrence was remanded to federal custody without bail, deemed a severe flight risk due to his hidden offshore accounts. Jamal, completely blindsided by Terrence's vicious betrayal, panicked. He could not afford a high-powered defense attorney, and the public defender assigned to his case told him bluntly that the paper trail was insurmountable. Jamal was officially indicted and remanded to the county jail to await trial. The brother who had confidently demanded I make him a vice president just days ago was now sitting in an orange jumpsuit, his life entirely ruined by his own desperate greed. Chloe's descent was even more rapid and humiliating. With Terrence's assets completely frozen by the federal government, she was entirely bankrupt overnight. Her credit cards were declined at the grocery store. Her luxury-leased vehicles were swiftly repossessed in the middle of the night from the driveway of the massive suburban estate she no longer owned. Desperate for cash and completely unwilling to accept her new reality, Chloe tried to leverage her sudden infamy. She aggressively pitched her story to a notorious reality television network, promising them an exclusive behind-the-scenes look at the downfall of Atlanta's elite. She thought she could spin her tragedy into a lucrative television contract. She underestimated my legal team. Victoria had immediately filed an ironclad legal embargo on the entire narrative, leveraging the ongoing federal investigation and utilizing aggressive cease and desist orders against any media outlet attempting to monetize the situation without my explicit legal consent. The reality television network, completely terrified of crossing my $90 million crisis management firm and interfering in a massive federal case, immediately dropped Chloe's pitch. She was completely silenced, legally blocked from profiting off the spectacular destruction she had helped orchestrate. Exactly 30 days after the press conference, the county sheriff arrived at the historic colonial estate I had purchased. The eviction notice had expired. Chloe, 7 months pregnant and weeping uncontrollably, was physically escorted off the property along with her few remaining suitcases of designer clothes. The sprawling, beautiful house that our grandmother had built. The house Chloe had viciously threatened to sue me for was finally completely empty. I ordered my property management company to immediately change every single lock, upgrade the security system, and prepare the estate for a full historical renovation. My parents, Elaine and Derek, experienced a slower, far more agonizing collapse. The bank moved aggressively on the second mortgage Derek had secretly taken out. Without Terrence's stolen money to cover the massive monthly payments, the foreclosure process was swift and brutal. Within 6 weeks, the bank officially seized their home of 30 years, the local news crews. Still hungry for every single detail of the scandal, parked across the street and filmed my parents carrying moving boxes out of their house in broad daylight. Elaine, completely stripped of her social standing, had nowhere to hide. The First Grace Community Church officially excommunicated both of them, publicly denouncing their complicity in the theft of the Widow and Orphan Charity Fund. The community they had worshipped, the social circle they had valued far above their own daughter, turned its back on them completely. Friends they had known for decades suddenly stopped returning their phone calls. They were entirely isolated, branded as toxic pariahs in a city that had once celebrated them. Desperate, broke, and entirely out of options, Elaine and Derek loaded a rented moving truck with whatever they could salvage. They drove to my grandmother's historic estate, genuinely believing they could just use the spare key they had hidden under the front porch planter to move into the house. They arrived to find a heavy iron security gate blocking the driveway, newly installed surveillance cameras tracking their every move, and a massive professional sign bolted to the brick wall declaring the property under the exclusive management of my corporate holding company. They stood at the gate, shaking the iron bars, crying, and completely unable to comprehend that the absolute final door had been slammed firmly in their faces. They were forced to move into a tiny, cramped 2-bedroom apartment in a decaying complex on the outskirts of the city, using the absolute last of Derek's diminished pension just to cover the security deposit. Chloe, with nowhere else to go and her husband rotting in federal jail, was forced to move in with them. The 3 people who had spent their entire lives obsessing over status, wealth, and looking down on me were now trapped together in a tiny, suffocating space, forced to confront the devastating consequences of their own monstrous choices every single day. They tried to contact me, of course. My personal cell phone was completely disconnected the day after the press conference, so they resorted to calling my corporate office. My assistant Sarah was under strict instructions to immediately hang up the moment she recognized their voices. They tried sending letters begging for forgiveness, pleading for financial assistance, and demanding that I step in to save the family. Every single letter was intercepted by my legal team and returned to sender unopened. I had built a fortress of wealth, legal boundaries, and absolute peace, and I was never going to lower the drawbridge for them again. As the months passed, the chaotic noise surrounding the scandal finally began to die down. The federal trials concluded swiftly. Terrence was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, his flashy executive lifestyle permanently replaced by concrete walls and heavily restricted visitation. Jamal, having eventually pleaded guilty to lesser charges of conspiracy, was sentenced to 5 years. The family that had once demanded absolute loyalty from me had entirely destroyed itself from the inside out. Through it all, I did not falter. I did not experience a sudden wave of guilt. I did not wonder if I had been too harsh. The emotional manipulation that had chained me to them for 30 years was completely severed. I focused entirely on my company, the massive, highly publicized success of the Ritz-Carlton press conference cemented my firm as the absolute premier crisis management agency in the country. Our corporate valuations soared past $120 million. I secured contracts with major tech conglomerates, high-profile politicians, and international financial institutions. I was building an empire, and I was building it entirely on my own terms, completely free from the suffocating weight of my family's toxic expectations. I bought a massive modern estate overlooking the mountains just outside of Atlanta. It was exactly the kind of home I had always dreamed of building, with floor-to-ceiling windows, a sprawling open floor plan, and not a single drop of pale blue paint anywhere to be found. It was a fortress of my own, making a place where I could finally breathe, create, and live authentically. The wounds they had inflicted on me were finally beginning to heal, not through forgiveness or reconciliation, but through the profound absolute power of complete detachment. The virality of that morning at the Ritz-Carlton was unprecedented. The footage of the press conference did not just make local news in Atlanta, it erupted across the global internet. Every major financial network, every social media platform, and every corporate news outlet played the clip of me holding up that silver flash drive. They analyzed every single second of the intense confrontation. They highlighted the exact moment Terrence realized he was trapped, the moment Chloe collapsed on the stage, and the absolute unwavering calm I maintained while dismantling my own blood relatives. In the corporate world, loyalty is often viewed as a massive liability when it blinds you to the cold truth. By publicly destroying my own brother-in-law to expose a massive financial fraud, I proved to every Fortune 500 company in the world that I possessed a level of ruthless integrity that simply could not be bought, intimidated, or manipulated. My company's valuation skyrocketed almost overnight. We had to lease 3 additional floors in our downtown Atlanta high-rise just to accommodate the massive influx of new staff and the overwhelming volume of new corporate retainers. We went from handling regional public relations disasters to managing global cyber breaches and international financial scandals. The very billionaires and corporate titans who used to ignore my emails were now having their executive assistants beg for 30 minutes of my time. I sat at the head of a massive mahogany conference table in New York City, looking across at the board of directors for one of the largest international investment banks in the world. Their chief executive officer, a man known for being incredibly demanding and entirely unforgiving, slid a $90 million retainer contract across the table toward me. He looked at me with a mixture of deep respect and slight apprehension. "We want your firm to handle all of our internal crisis mitigation and digital security," he said, his voice echoing in the cavernous boardroom. "But I have to ask you, Charmaine, that press conference in Atlanta, you took down your own family without batting an eye. You did not even flinch when the federal agents walked into the room." I picked up the solid gold pen resting next to the contract. I looked the powerful executive directly in the eyes, my expression completely neutral. "They were a malignant liability," I replied smoothly, my voice steady and cold. "They committed fraud. They compromised my reputation, and they expected me to fall on the sword to protect their criminal enterprise simply because we shared DNA. I do not protect liabilities. I eliminate them. If I am willing to do that to the people who raised me, imagine exactly what I will do to anyone who tries to attack your bank." The chief executive officer stared at me for a long moment before a slow, genuine smile spread across his face. He nodded his head once, completely satisfied. I signed the $90 million contract, shook his hand, and walked out of the boardroom with absolute authority. I had become completely untouchable. Despite my soaring success and the impenetrable legal walls my attorney Victoria had built around me, the ghosts of my past still tried to aggressively haunt the perimeter of my new life. Elaine and Derek refused to accept that the bridge was permanently burned. Because I had changed all of my personal phone numbers, upgraded the physical security at my corporate headquarters, and moved into a highly secure gated estate, they had absolutely no physical way to reach me. So they resorted to pathetic, desperate digital stalking. They started buying cheap prepaid burner phones from local convenience stores just to bypass the blocks I had placed on their original cell numbers. Once a week, usually late on a Sunday evening, a strange, unregistered number would pop up on my private phone. I never answered. I would let the call go directly to my secure voicemail system. My cybersecurity team had set up a specialized digital filter that automatically transcribed any voicemails originating from those unverified numbers, sending the text directly to a secure folder on my tablet, so I would never even have to hear their actual voices. I would sit on the expansive stone terrace of my new mountain estate, sipping a glass of expensive red wine, and calmly read the transcriptions of my mother's voicemails. The messages always followed the exact same predictable pattern. First, Elaine would try to use heavy religious guilt, reminding me that God commands children to honor their parents. When that failed to elicit any response, she would pivot to playing the ultimate victim. She would describe in agonizing detail the terrible conditions of the cramped, run-down apartment they were forced to share with Chloe. She would talk about the constant noise, the leaking plumbing, and the crushing humiliation of having to ride the public bus because they could no longer afford a personal vehicle. "Charmaine, please just send us enough money to buy a used car," one transcribed message read. "Chloe had her baby. You have a niece now. You cannot let your own niece grow up in this terrible neighborhood. Terrence's public defender is completely useless. We just need $50,000 to get a real lawyer to appeal his federal sentence. You make that kind of money in a single hour. Please stop punishing us. We have learned our lesson." I would read these desperate pleas, finish my wine, and hit the delete button without a single ounce of hesitation. I felt absolutely no guilt. I felt no obligation to rescue them from the prison of poverty they had built with their own greedy hands. They were not reaching out because they loved me. They were reaching out because I was a walking, breathing ATM machine. And they were absolutely furious that the cash dispenser had been permanently shut off. They used an innocent newborn baby as leverage, completely ignoring the fact that they were perfectly willing to let me freeze on the streets just 4 years ago. Every deleted voicemail was a reaffirmation of my strict boundaries. Every ignored plea was a testament to my newfound emotional strength. Victoria made sure that my digital boundaries were backed by devastating legal consequences. When Jamal tried to send a threatening letter to my corporate office from his county jail cell, demanding that I put money into his commissary account, Victoria responded by slapping him with a permanent restraining order. When Chloe attempted to show up at the main security gate of my new neighborhood, screaming at the armed guards that she was my sister and had a legal right to see me, Victoria had her arrested for criminal trespassing within 15 minutes. The local police held Chloe in a holding cell for 24 hours, a brutal reminder that the days of her acting entitled and untouchable were entirely over. I had constructed a magnificent, impenetrable fortress. My new home was a sprawling, modern masterpiece of glass steel and warm, natural wood, nestled high in the mountains and surrounded by acres of private protected forest. I had a state-of-the-art security system, a private chef, and a dedicated staff who treated me with genuine respect. But the true strength of my fortress was not the physical walls or the expensive security gates. The true strength was the profound, unshakable peace I had cultivated within my own mind. I no longer woke up with a tight, anxious knot in my chest, worrying about how I was going to meet my mother's impossible expectations. I no longer spent my holidays feeling small and insignificant, while Chloe paraded her fake wealth around the dining room table. I no longer had to diminish my own light just to make my family feel comfortable in their mediocrity. The heavy, suffocating fog of their emotional abuse had finally lifted, revealing a life of absolute clarity and limitless potential. My business continued to break industry records year after year. I was featured on the cover of prestigious national business magazines not as a victim of a tragic family scandal, but as the brilliant, uncompromising architect of my own destiny. I traveled the world, spoke at global technology summits, and built a vast network of fiercely loyal friends mentors. and colleagues who valued my intelligence, my resilience, and my unwavering authenticity. The people who had tried to break me had ultimately handed me the exact tools I needed to conquer the corporate world. They thought casting me out would destroy me. Instead, it was the greatest gift they could have ever given me. By stripping away my safety net, they forced me to learn how to fly. And now I was soaring higher than they could ever possibly reach, leaving them far behind in the cold ashes of their own greed. 1 year later, the thick, humid heat of an Atlanta summer settled over my mountain estate, but the atmosphere was completely different from the suffocating Sunday dinners of my past. I stood on the massive cedar deck of my home, looking out over the sprawling green lawn. The sweet, smoky scent of barbecue ribs and grilled sweet corn drifted through the warm air, mingling with the heavy bass of classic R&B music playing from the outdoor speakers. There were no fake smiles here. There were no tense conversations about status, no backhanded compliments, and absolutely no hidden agendas. There was only genuine, unfiltered joy. I was hosting my first annual summer cookout, and the guest list was entirely made up of my chosen family. Down by the infinity pool, I watched my lead corporate attorney, Victoria, laughing hysterically, her usually stern courtroom demeanor completely gone, as she tried to balance a plate of potato salad while playfully arguing with my head of security, Marcus. My forensic accountant, David, was manning the massive steel grill, wearing a ridiculous apron and debating grilling techniques with my executive assistant, Sarah. Around them were the mentors who had guided me when I was just a broke freelance coder, the colleagues who had stood by my side during the most intense corporate crises, and the friends who had offered me a couch to sleep on when my biological family threw me out into the winter rain. These were the people who had invested in my potential when I had absolutely nothing to offer them in return. They did not care about my $90 million valuation or my Forbes magazine features. They cared about me. I walked down the wooden stairs and joined the crowd, instantly pulled into warm hugs and loud, overlapping conversations. Someone handed me a cold drink. A group of children, the sons and daughters of my staff, ran past me, chasing each other across the manicured grass with bright water guns. I looked around at the beautiful, vibrant community I had carefully built from the ground up. I thought back to the agonizing anxiety I used to feel every time I drove to my parents' colonial house, the way my stomach would tie itself into painful knots before I even walked through the front door. I remembered the sheer exhaustion of constantly shrinking myself to make Chloe and Terrence feel bigger. Looking around my sunlit backyard, surrounded by the beautiful sound of genuine laughter, I realized that the heavy, suffocating weight I had carried for over 3 decades was entirely gone. I had finally broken the cycle. This was what true family looked like. It was not a rigid hierarchy built on fear manipulation and the constant threat of exclusion. It was a circle of mutual respect, unwavering support, and authentic love. For the first time in my entire 36 years of life, I was finally home. As the sun began to slowly set behind the distant blue mountains, casting a brilliant golden glow over the entire estate, I stepped away from the loud music and the joyful crowds. I walked to the edge of the stone terrace, leaning against the cool metal railing, taking a deep breath of the crisp evening air. I looked directly into the camera, speaking to every single person who has ever felt trapped in the exact same dark place I used to be. Society will constantly tell Black women that we have to carry our family's generational trauma on our tired backs. We are conditioned from a very young age to believe that we must be the strong ones, the uncomplaining mules, the endless ATM machines, and the ultimate saviors for the people who break us down. We are told that blood is thicker than water, that we have to forgive the unforgivable, and that setting boundaries is somehow an act of supreme selfishness. We are expected to endure constant disrespect, financial abuse, and emotional manipulation in the sacred name of family loyalty. We are taught to eagerly swallow poison just because it is served on a familiar plate. But I am here to tell you right now that loyalty should never be a suicide pact. You do not owe your success, your sanity, or your hard-earned peace to people who actively tried to destroy your future. You do not owe a seat at your beautiful table to the people who forced you to eat scraps on the cold floor. If your family only loves you when they can completely control you or drain your bank account, that is not love, that is extortion, and you have every right in the world to walk away from it without a single ounce of guilt. Sometimes the only way to win a rigged game is to stop playing by their toxic rules entirely. You have to flip the board over. You have to buy the building, change the locks, and shut them out for good. Healing does not always mean reconciliation. Sometimes the most profound healing comes from absolute, uncompromising separation. I chose to save myself. I chose my peace over their comfort. And standing here today, surrounded by a life I built with my own two hands, I can honestly say it was the sweetest revenge of all. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever had to walk away from toxic family members, or if you are currently struggling to set rigid boundaries with the people you love, please let me know your experiences in the comments below. You are not alone in this fight. Please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with any woman who needs a reminder of her own incredible power. Remember, you hold the pen to your own life story. Do not let anyone else write your ending. Stay strong, stay unapologetic, and always protect your peace.